Good morning, everybody. So Frederick, who you've just seen in the last presentation, and together with myself, led by the KBR, the Royal Library of Belgium, leads a project called Data-KBR. We collaborate with Ghent University, both Ghent University Centre for Digital Humanities and ID Lab, the Data Science Lab, and ACDC, the best acronym in the world, the Digital Humanities Platform at the University of Antwerp. So this is a team effort. But today, I would like to briefly introduce to the project and particularly focus on experimenting with collections of data at KBR and interdisciplinary collaboration. So some of you may have already heard of the Collections as Data initiative. This originated in the United States and helped cultural heritage professionals to think differently about how to provide access to their collections in a machine-readable format. Even though that was invented in the United States, the FAIR data movement, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data movement in Europe is very closely connected. What does collections as data mean? This morning, we've been talking a lot about digitized historical newspapers, and what it means is providing access to the underlying files of digital cultural heritage resources, such as digitized newspapers, to facilitate data level access and analysis using tools and methods in the field of digital humanities. So we were lucky enough to propose a project to BELSPO, and the same kind of funding that the ADOX project is funded, to facilitate data level access to KBR's digitized and born digital collections for digital humanities research. So our aim is, and we've talked a lot about this morning, moving from the historical digitized newspaper portal BelgicaPress through the digitized historical data to providing the data level access. However, it's very important that we don't do this in a vacuum. So to validate this data level access to the collections, we have got 3 interdisciplinary research scenarios in the project. One, Collective Action Belgium, led by the Ghent Centre for Digital Humanities. The second, the Feuilleton in Belgium, looking at literary supplements, led by ACDC at the University of Antwerp, and the History of Belgian Journalism, together with the Fed twin between ULB and KBR. So to go through those in a little bit more detail. So the Ghent use case here is social history in the period, the interbellum and World War I, and the topics involve tracing the dynamics of contention, strikes, demonstration, and other forms of collective action in Belgium. Secondly, the Feuilleton in Belgium, which is the literary supplements. Here you can see this at the bottom third of the screen. This discipline here is literature, and the period is 1830 to 1930, so the first period of the first century of the Belgian nation. And what we're wanting to do is map the publication of literature in Belgian newspapers. This is led by the University of Antwerp and in collaboration with the University of Borås in Sweden. And finally, the history of journalism in Belgium. That is led by CAMI, the Centre for Archives and Media Information, very similar to the digital lab just presented. This is another of the labs available. Here we're looking at the discipline of media history. The period is 1830 to 1970, and we're looking at 2 main areas: a database for Belgian journalists, so very similar to Anne's resistance people in the Wikibase project, but looking from the perspective of Belgian journalism, and generally looking at the history of Belgian journalism and the critical discourses that played off in Belgian newspapers. So thinking about this collections as data workflow. So on the left of the screen, you can see the 3 scenarios, research scenarios we've just presented. And in the right-hand side of the screen, we've got BelgicaPress, the list of digitized historical newspapers, and the underlying data sets. Here you can see an article from the Journal of Information Science, where our colleagues at the University of Alicante developed a workflow for collections as data. One of the things we want to do in the Belgian project is to validate this workflow that was presented within the Belgian context. So going on to Collective Action Belgium in a little bit more detail. So how did we develop the first corpus we wanted to use? So we were looking at the period of interbellum and World War I. So we looked at the general strikes that happened in Belgium. Here you can see the Wikipedia entries in English for the various different strikes in Belgium. So we looked at the BelgicaPress and which of the particular newspapers were digitized in this period. So here you can see 1913 in these 6 different newspapers, and here we had a balance between 3 French language and 3 Dutch language newspapers. And 1913 was already very interesting from a historical perspective, because that was when the World Fair was in Ghent, and there were a lot of demonstrations in that period. Also, we looked at 1950 because we were very interested in the digitized images. They start to appear as illustrations from around the 1920s. And from 1950, we have a good coverage of news photographs in the digitized newspaper corpus. And finally, we talked about the importance of historical context of the digitized newspapers. And together with our newspaper curator, Mark Dorr, from the KBR, he has provided further information about the historical context of each of the newspapers. And this will at a later point be ingested into both to the catalogue and into BelgicaPress itself. And finally, how do we provide data, these collections as data, to the researchers? So in close collaboration, and actually this part of the project was led by the KBR's ICT team, we looked at upscaling a file transfer system to data transfer. And here you can see the first screens of the DataSense service that allows the KBR to share at least 100 gigabytes of data with the researchers in the partner institutions in order to provide that data to those research groups for analysis. We've talked a lot about the humanities side, but data science is incredibly important in this project. And here we're working particularly with ID Lab from Ghent University. Here you can see some examples of document layout analysis using BelgicaPress. Here you can see the different colors represent different articles within the digitized newspapers collection. And ID Lab, and here you can see all of our colleagues listed on the screen. They are taking the images of the digitized newspapers, running various algorithms, including article segmentation, named entity recognition, and then linking that to Wikidata. So one of the first collaboration activities that we are working on is how can we automatically recognize these literary supplements at the bottom third of the screen, as you see here. This is being worked on in close collaboration with the University of Antwerp and the University of Boras. As you can see, feuilletons are a combination of distinct visual and textual features. So as we just saw on this last slide, they appear in the bottom third of the screen. They often extended to the full breadth of the paper and appeared on the front or the second page of the newspaper. Also, they had distinct titles and ended with words like "to be continued." As this was kind of an exciting thing, you had to wait until the next edition of the newspaper to find out more about the story. Excuse me. What we're currently working on is the next steps to train the model to automatically identify and extract these particular, let's say, articles, feuilletons, or literary supplements into a corpus. And I will put this link into the chat after the presentation. But in order to demonstrate these possibilities within the digitized historical newspapers, and here Le Peuple from 1938 has been used, you can explore some of these data science enhancements of the corpus in the newspaper AI demonstrator. And finally, these interdisciplinary workflows are absolutely essential for undertaking these interdisciplinary research projects. We've been working together with the European NewsEye project, and here you can see a recently published article about integrated interdisciplinary workflows for research on historical newspapers. This was only just published a few weeks ago, so I'll also put the link to that article in the chat. So a whistle-stop tour introducing DATA-KBR project. Thanks very much, and we're always happy to hear more. So thanks very much for your attention.